All right, so today we're diving into something that could really shake up the world of education in the U.S. Really fundamentally change things.
Yeah, big time.
We're talking about these reports that are coming out about President Trump and his apparent intention to sign an executive order that would actually close down the U.S. Department of Education.
Wow.
We're looking at an NBC News transcript which details this whole thing, the initial announcement and, everything that's surrounding it.
Right. So basically our mission today for you, the listener, is to kind of get past those initial shockwaves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the headlines.
Yeah, the headlines, and figure out, okay, if this actually happens, what are the immediate things that could be set in motion?
Right.
And then what are the longer-term realities,
Yeah, given how the whole system actually works.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not as simple as okay, sign the order and boom, it's gone.
Right, exactly. There's a lot more to it. And I think one of the things that the transcript highlights right off the bat is that, President Trump is framing this as, fulfilling a major campaign promise.
Oh, for sure.
And it's something that conservatives have been, advocating for a long time.
Right. This idea of a smaller federal government footprint on education.
Exactly. And, bringing it back to more of a state and local level.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I think is really at the heart of this push is this idea that, if you pull control away from the federal level and bring it back to the states, you're essentially giving more power to parents.
Right, like more direct influence.
Yeah, more direct influence over their kids' schooling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me that, the administration has already been taking some steps that could be seen as, laying the groundwork for this.
Interesting. Like what kind of steps?
Well, the report mentions that Education Secretary Linda McMahon, she's already overseen a pretty significant reduction in the department's workforce.
Oh, wow. How much are we talking?
It says around 50%, like almost half of the people who work there.
Oh, wow. That's pretty substantial.
Yeah, and there's actually this quote from the report that refers to it as the department's final mission.
Okay. So that definitely sends a pretty strong message.
Right. Like they're not messing around. This seems like a very deliberate, direction that they're heading in.
It does. And so according to this fact sheet that they mentioned in the news report, the executive order itself is going to directly instruct Secretary McMahon to take, basically every necessary step to shut down the department.
Right.
And get that authority, back over to the individual states.
Okay, so every necessary step, what does that actually mean?
Well, yeah, that's the big question, right?
Like, how far can they actually go with this?
Right, because they're also trying to give people some assurances at the same time.
That's true. Yeah, the transcript mentions that a senior administration official is saying that, crucial things like Title I funding for, underprivileged students, and then, federal student loans, the aid programs for students with disabilities. They're saying that all that stuff won't be touched by this.
But see, that's where we get into this really important distinction.
Yeah.
Between, what they want to do and what they actually can do.
Legally, yeah.
Legally, yeah.
Practically.
Because it's great that they want to protect those things.
Right.
But how are they going to actually do that without, the Department of Education there, in at least its current form?
Right. It seems like it would create some pretty big roadblocks.
Yeah, for sure. It's not that easy.
So this is a big point that the transcript makes clear.
You
can't just wave a magic wand and close down a federal department like that.
Yeah, you need Congress to actually make it happen.
Exactly. It has to be an act of Congress to officially, get rid of it and transfer all that authority.
So you can think of it like, I don't know. You've got this house you've been living in for years, and you decide you want to completely renovate it. You can maybe, start clearing out some clutter, maybe rearrange some furniture.
Right.
But to actually knock down walls and change the structure,
you need permits.
Yeah.
You need approval.
Right, exactly. And so that's kind of where we are with this whole Department of Education thing.
That's a good analogy because, in the report, they talk about how some states are actually really excited about this.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned Texas, Florida, Indiana.
Those governors are like, yeah, let's do it. We want more control over education.
Which makes sense, right? That fits in with this whole philosophy of localism. But then, the report also brings up this other really important point.
Okay.
Not every state is necessarily ready or even wants to take on this much more responsibility.
Right. So even if it all happened like that.
Yeah, it could be a real mess.
And I think it's easy to overlook that.
Oh, yeah, because you're talking about some states that maybe have the infrastructure in place, to handle it.
Yeah, they're already doing a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, but then you've got others that are going to be like scrambling to catch up.
Right, right. And I think that's where it gets really tricky because, if the federal government pulls back,
Yeah, who's going to fill that void?
then is it going to be consistent, from state to state?
Exactly, exactly. And that's a recipe for some serious inequality.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so there's another piece of this reported executive order that we need to dig into.
Okay, what's that?
It's this thing about the fact sheet says that any money that's left over in the Department of Education,
Mm-hmm.
it can't be used for anything that they define as like DEI or gender ideology.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting, right? Because it really highlights this other objective that the administration seems to have.
Right. It's not just about like shrinking the size of government. It's also about, controlling what kind of things are being taught or emphasized in schools.
Yeah, and this definitely ties into like the broader national conversation that's been happening about, curriculum content.
It's for sure like, what should be taught in schools and how.
Yeah, and it definitely suggests that, they want to shift funding away from certain things that they perceive
Yeah.
as, aligning with those concepts.
Right. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking about this, and it's a big question that came up in the news report, too.
What's that?
What about student loans?
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Like, if the Department of Education is basically gone,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to run all those programs?
Right, like who's going to take care of FAFSA, all that stuff.
Exactly. And what about students who, want to go to colleges in different states?
Oh, yeah, that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
For sure. Because you're talking about, millions of students, billions of dollars.
It's a massive system.
And if you don't have a clear plan for who's going to take over all that.
Yeah, it could be total chaos.
Right. Think about transferring millions of loan accounts, processing new applications.
Making sure all the states are following the same rules.
It gets really messy really fast.
It does. And especially with something as important as, access to education.
Right. Exactly.
You don't want to create a situation where students are disadvantaged just because of where they live or what state they want to go to school in.
And that's the other thing the news correspondent really emphasizes.
Okay.
Even if they want to dissolve the department through Congress,
Yeah.
it's a long shot.
Oh, yeah. You've got potential filibusters in the Senate.
Yeah.
60 votes needed to overcome that.
Which is, practically impossible in the current political climate.
Yeah. And even getting a simple majority in the House isn't a given.
Right, because we were talking earlier about how some states are more ready than others.
Exactly. So you're going to have a lot of representatives who are like, wait a minute, hold on.
We're not ready for this.
Yeah, we're not ready for this. And their constituents are going to be putting pressure on them to, vote against it.
Right. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole situation.
It is, because you have this clash between, these big, bold ideas and then the reality of, how difficult it is to actually make them happen.
All right. So let's take a step back for a second and try to, summarize what we've learned.
Okay.
So we've got this planned executive order from President Trump aimed at shutting down the Department of Education.
Right. A big move.
It's all based on this idea of, returning control to the states, giving parents more power, and, this added layer of restricting funding for certain types of initiatives.
Right. And we can see how this aligns with, long-standing conservative goals and principles.
Exactly. But here's the thing.
What's that?
Well, the president can certainly use an executive order to kickstart some things.
Yeah, like downsizing staff.
Maybe shifting some responsibilities around.
Those immediate administrative actions.
To really get rid of the department entirely and hand all that power over to the state.
You need Congress to sign off on it.
Exactly. And that's where things get really complicated.
Yeah, you've got potential roadblocks in both the House and the Senate.
And you've got this whole patchwork of states that are all at different levels of preparedness.
Some are eager, some are hesitant.
So it's a really complex picture.
It is. And I think that's why it's so important for us to understand not just what the administration is saying, but also, what the practical and legal limitations are.
Right, because those are going to shape, what actually happens in the end.
Absolutely.
So as you're thinking about this, I want to leave you with this one final thought.
All right.
Let's say, for the sake of argument that this executive order actually goes through, and the Department of Education is, significantly downsized or even completely dissolved. What are the ripple effects?
Yeah, like what actually changes in the day-to-day lives of students and teachers and parents?
Because even if Washington, D.C. isn't calling the shots anymore,
there are still going to be real consequences on the ground.
Right. So how will curriculum change?
How will funding be allocated?
Will some students have more opportunities than others?
Yeah. Will there be more inequality in the system?
These are all questions that we're going to have to grapple with in the months and years to come.
And it's something that, we as citizens need to be paying close attention to.
Absolutely. So that's it for today's deep dive.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening.